In the heart of Appalachia's Tigert River Valley, there lies a small town coated in snow-white powder all year long, with an orange river that glows at night. Its streets that once served as the heart of a thriving regional tourist trade now brim with mutants and monsters. I'm the resident cartographer, and this is the story of that town. This is the story of Grafton, West Virginia. We'll start this with an examination of the sites surrounding Grafton in the Fallout universe and in the real world. We'll then move into the layout of the town in the Fallout universe and how it compares to the town in the real world. We'll examine the history of Grafton in the Fallout universe and a brief history of Grafton in the real world. We'll then close with some notes that I have on the topic. With that said, let's get started. In the Fallout universe, Grafton sits at the heart of Appalachia's Toxic Valley. In the river valley to the west lies Becker Farm. A short distance north along that same river, the makeshift vault can be found dug into the hillside. Up that hill to the west lies the ramshackle Cobbleton Farm. Northwest of Grafton lies Hemlock Holes, an old golf course that is cratered with nuclear waste and shows signs of a past life as a battlefield. North of Grafton, the Woods Estate, home to Arthur Wood, the owner of Grafton Steel, is falling to pieces. East of Grafton on the river lies Smith Farm. Southeast of Grafton, Eastern Regional Penitentiary serves as a nightmarish reminder of the misuse of automation. Over the hills south of Grafton lies the scorched-infested Wilson Brothers Auto Repair. Just west of there, the rustic vacation site Twin Pine Cabins has been taken over by the Blood Eagle Raiders, who evicted the previous super mutant residents in 2103. Let's now compare the locations of real-world sites that can be found in-game with their locations in-game. Clarksburg, West Virginia, found northeast of Grafton in-game, can be found 18 miles west-southwest of Grafton in the real world. Monongah, West Virginia, found southeast of Grafton in-game, lies approximately 13.5 miles west-northwest of Grafton in the real world. While real-world Morgantown lies approximately 20 miles north-northeast of Grafton, in-game, Morgantown is found to the south-southeast. While the in-game version of Priggett's Fort is found east-northeast of Grafton, the real-world version can be found about 13 miles away to the north-northwest. While the Philippi Battlefield Cemetery lies east-northeast of Grafton in-game, the real-world version, the Philippi Battlefield, lies approximately 13.5 miles south of Grafton. Grafton Lake, found east-southeast of Grafton in-game, is likely a representation of the real-world Tigert Lake. In this same vein, while Grafton Lake is held up by the Grafton Dam, Tigert Lake is held up by the Tigert Dam. With the sites around Grafton covered, let's consider the layout of the town itself. In the real world, Grafton is located at the junction of Three Fork Creek and the Tigert Valley River, a major tributary of the Monongahela River. Because of this local river junction, the town is split into thirds, and each of these sections is laid out on a grid with the long streets running parallel to the Tigert Valley River. The largest highways are US 119, which runs from Pineville, Kentucky at the south end to Sandy Township, Pennsylvania at the north end, and US 50, which runs nearly coast to coast from West Sacramento, California to Ocean City, Maryland. Real-world Grafton lies on some major rail lines, including the historic B&O Railroad, which runs through the town from the east to the southwest. In the game, Grafton lies on a single unnamed river of glowing orange water. While this river is likely a representation of the Tigert Valley River, the real-world river flows north and west, while the river in-game flows east. In-game, the city lies primarily on the south side of the river and generally on a grid. While most of the highways in-game are not labeled along their routes, we know that Grafton sits at the northern terminus of Interstate 59. Along with that, the name of the in-game streets are found in real Grafton as well, including Main Street, St. John Street, West Boyd Street, Francis Street, Beach Street, and West Wilford Street. While these streets are generally laid out in the same fashion as their real-world versions, they're found on the south side of the Tigert Valley River rather than on the north side as they are in real life, except for Beach Street, which does cross the river. As for the in-game representation of the railroad, Grafton lies at the northern terminus of the Red Line. There are 3 spots in the game that appear to be recreations of real-world structures. First, we have the Mother's Day Shrine, the site of the first Mother's Day celebration on May 10th, 1908. Second, this structure that I believe was once the Grafton Hotel seems to be present in the game. Lastly, I believe that this in-game structure might be a representation of the real-world B&O Railroad Depot. For honorable mention, we have Grafton High School, although I don't know if these are supposed to be the same structure. Alright, comparisons aside, let's get to the composition of Grafton in the Fallout universe as it's represented in Fallout 76. Grafton is home to 27 houses, including a few duplexes, and a hotel. There are many small businesses, most appearing to have apartments above them. Among these businesses, there is at least one restaurant, a pawn shop, and a Red Rocket station. In terms of community buildings, there are 4 utility buildings, 5 polling places, a church that resembles the real-world Mother's Day shrine, Grafton High School, the police station, and Grafton City Hall. In terms of transportation, there is 1 bus stop and the train station. With the setting established, let's get into the story of Grafton in the Fallout universe. In the mid to late 21st century, northwestern Appalachia was a center of tourism. While the ski slopes in the mountains to the east were popular in winter, the land around Grafton was a draw the rest of the year. Visitors came from all around to visit historical sites like Prickett's Fort, the Philippi Battlefield Cemetery, the Mother's Day Shrine, and the Colonel Kelly Monument, and recreational spots like Grafton Lake, Wavy Willard's Water Park, Kitty Corner Cabins, Black Bear Lodge, and Hemlock Holes Golf Course. Aside from tourism, the region's other major industry was the manufacture of steel at the Grafton Steel Mill. As the war with the People's Republic of China intensified in the 2070s, the steel industry only increased in importance. So important was steel to the war effort that the federal government provided special dispensation to the mill's owner, Arthur Wood, to ignore certain labor and environmental laws. The mill dumped liquid waste straight into Grafton Lake and belched smoke into the sky. A new 6-day, 72-hour weekly schedule was introduced, alongside the loss of sick pay and overtime time and a half pay only in the 11th and 12th hours. These conditions soon drove the employees to exhaustion and illness. Amid the growing misery in Grafton, Flavia Stabo, owner of the Grafton Pawn Shop, was investigating strange occurrences elsewhere in Appalachia. And looking into a series of odd stories ranging from heavily laden trucks to unexplained deaths to the hunt for the supposed Chinese spy, Shanghai Sally, Stabo was on the verge of unearthing a massive government conspiracy. Though she disappeared in the process of this investigation, she set up a failsafe. A series of letters that, in the event of her death, would be dispersed to influential members of the community to bring her findings to their attention. In 2076, Billy Angler, one of the exhausted workers at Grafton Steel, fell straight into a vat of molten metal. This tragedy would eventually result in the ruin of the region's environment. Billy Angler's brother, Darius, had once worked for Grafton Steel as a chemist, but he had left when the conditions worsened. Furious at the death of his brother, Darius swore vengeance on Grafton Steel. Over the next few months, the eccentric, paranoid genius of a chemist poured his efforts into ruining the mill. By sometime in late 2076 to early 2077, his revenge was ready. He entered the mill during a shift change and injected an additive directly into the blast furnace. The chemical spread through the mill, corrupting the very metal of the equipment. The corrupted equipment not only wore out significantly more rapidly than normal, it caused the plant to send plumes of toxic white powder into the air. This powder began to spread across the valley, dusting the land like toxic snow. Though the damage could have been stopped if the plant had been shut down temporarily to replace the affected equipment, mill owner Arthur Wood blamed the workers for the sabotage and deemed it right that they suffer the consequences of their actions. While the existing pollution was already causing health problems, things only got worse. Illness began to set in for the children and other vulnerable populations as the ambient levels of poison rose. When an anonymous whistleblower released the steel mill's horrifying real safety statistics, it only added fuel to the fire of public discontent. Grafton locals surrounded the mill demanding action, only to discover that the government was on Arthur Wood's side. The National Guard, deployed by Governor Evans, cleared the protesters from the mill, allowing the plant to continue to poison the region. Abigail Poole, Speaker of the House, fired off an angry email to Governor Evans that June, demanding answers on the state of the mill. She noted that along with everything the mill was doing to the people in the area, it was destroying the tourism industry at the same time. Over the next few months, things only got worse as toxic powder blanketed the valley. Unfortunately, the refuse of Grafton Steel wasn't the only environmental catastrophe that was unfolding. Illegal dumping of radioactive waste took place in spots across the region, including at Hemlock Holes. Beyond this, as the dusting of toxic powder from the mill increased, a measure was taken to protect the local bleached dogwood tree population, which could only have made the situation worse. Large aerosolizer machines were constructed that dispersed fertilizer across the valley. While this potentially could have helped some plants, the existing toxins were killing those plants regardless of their food supply, and the airborne fertilizer can't have been healthy for the human and animal populations. In Grafton, citizens attempted to protest the destruction of their lives and found a wholly unsympathetic local government as well. The corrupt mayors cracked down on local demonstrations to protect their campaign donor, Grafton Steel. In spite of the First Amendment violations carried out by the mayor in suppressing the people's right to assemble, the principles of the Republic were still being observed in at least one area. In 5 spots across town, polling places were erected to prepare for the upcoming special election. There were 2 items on the ballot: the election of a replacement for Senator Sam Blackwell, and the Appalachian Prosperity Act. A friend of the survivalist prepper group known as the Free States, Sam Blackwell had fled office weeks before, following threats on his daughter's life, while the APA, if approved, would lead to the replacement of all state government workers with robots by the year 2087. Unfortunately, the election would be preempted by the end of the world. In the early morning hours of Saturday, October 23, 2077, across the mountains to the east, an enormous, headless beast was being loaded into a tractor trailer. Once a human resident of the tiny town of Huntersville, West Virginia, the scientists of West Tech had used a variant of FEV to mutate this unfortunate being beyond recognition. Having grown too large for its containment cell, the monster was being transferred to a different site to the west. As the truck pulled through Grafton hours later, a searing flash of light blinded the driver, who subsequently lost control of the truck and wrecked in a ditch. The mutated test subject in the back broke containment and became the first real Grafton monster, taking on the role of the legendary local cryptid. While this beast was undoubtedly terrifying to the locals, they had bigger problems to contend with, as the flash that had blinded the truck driver was that of a nuclear detonation, one of many that were taking place across the world that morning. Cars crashed across town, landslides took place. The staff of City Hall gathered on the roof to drink and wait for the end together. In the aftermath of the bombs, the valley around Grafton that was already becoming unhealthy for human occupation only became more toxic. Though the region never saw a direct strike, it's likely that fallout from Ohio or Pennsylvania dropped on the area. Along with that, the toxic white soot from Grafton Steel continued to pour out as the automated parts of the mill continued to operate after the bombs. To make matters worse, shortly after the bombs fell, so too did the Valiant space station, which dropped into the northern end of the valley. When it hit the ground, the space station cracked open, pouring an unknown, glowing liquid into the local water table that managed to spread throughout the valley. With the valley becoming too toxic for life, it's likely that those citizens that could flee, fled, while those that couldn't were killed by the myriad poisons seeping into the environment. The once beautiful region now earned the moniker the Toxic Valley. A few years after the destruction and/or exodus of the human population of Grafton, a change occurred in local government. With no one occupying the mayor's position, the automated mayor's assistant organized a new election, which it subsequently won in a landslide with 100% approval from the electorate. In the aftermath of its stunning victory, the new mayor organized events in the town, including the Grafton Day Parade, complete with live Grafton Monster, and used what power it could to put down the riots of local mutants, just as its predecessors did. The mayor would be alone in its town for about 6 years, until the arrival of some newcomers from the south. These newcomers were the Responders, an organization of survivors who sought to establish an outpost in Grafton. Originally composed of volunteers from the surviving police, firefighters, EMTs, and doctors of Charleston, the Responders had recently been forced to evacuate the ruins of Charleston and relocate to Morgantown in the aftermath of the Christmas flood of 2082. Having lost hundreds in that flood, the Responders were searching far and wide for new recruits and were setting up outposts all across Appalachia. When they pushed into the Toxic Valley, they were shocked by how poisonous the environment was, and they attempted to deploy poison control robots to clean the environment. These robots were so overloaded with stimuli that they're said to have exploded when exposed to the valley, but the Responders pushed in regardless. With the assistance of another survivor group, the Brotherhood of Steel, the Responders managed to clear out the mutants and gain a foothold in Grafton. Here they established a pair of outposts, one at the train station and one adjacent to Town Hall. While they would have to deal with the annoyance of the belligerent automated mayor demanding bribes now and then, they managed to maintain control of the city for the next decade. Though they didn't know it, the Responders weren't the only group operating in Grafton. Agents of the shadowy military-industrial complex organization known as the Enclave also visited the town, deploying communication dishes on rooftops here and there. There's no record of the groups ever coming into conflict, and it appears that the Enclave left the Responders blissfully unaware of their presence. Responder control of the territory came to an end with the arrival of an endless stream of monsters from over the mountains to the east. In the summer of 2086, the city of Harper's Ferry was wiped off the map. Having barely survived the war, the city had been saved by the Free States Organization in 2079. After 7 years of hard work, Harper's Ferry was a fortified center of trade in the wilds that were known as the Mire. In 1 hour, all of that was brought down by monstrous giant bats the locals would come to refer to as scorch beasts. These beasts spread the scorched plague, an illness that converted those infected by it into servants of the bats that would then fight to kill their former allies, spreading the plague to them in the process. While the bats generally wouldn't be seen on the western side of the mountains until late 2095, their minions were becoming a serious problem for the responders in Grafton by late 2093. By the end of that year, they were forced to flee from Grafton and pull out of the toxic valley. Once again, the streets of Grafton were occupied by mutants and monsters. This condition spread across Appalachia until there were no uninfected or unmutated humans on the surface by the spring of 2097. Even the sentient ghouls who were immune to the scorched plague fled the area. William Keller, the leader of a ghoul exodus from Appalachia, posted a message on the door of the church, inviting others to join him in a migration to the capital wasteland. Appalachia would be home to little more than monsters until Reclamation Day. On October 23, 2102, 25 years to the day after the bombs, the door of Vault 76 rolled open, and the inhabitants of the vault poured out to reclaim and rebuild America. As they spread outward, those within its range heard the voice of the automated mayor of Grafton calling to them. It had them perform a series of tasks to prepare the local tourist attractions for the upcoming season. A strange goal considering the state of the tourism industry, much less the country. Along with this, it requested assistance in hiding toxic waste, witnessing the Grafton Day Parade, fighting mirelurks, putting down rioters, helping to preserve the local dogwood tree population, and the burial of corpses it assumed were Civil War dead. Aside from assisting the mayor, the Vault Dwellers visited Grafton to clean up mutagenic waste on the behalf of the Pioneer Scouts. While the town is still too toxic for resettlement, it once again has humans visiting it on a regular basis. That's about everything I could find on Grafton in the Fallout universe, so let's move on to the real-world history of the town. The earliest evidence of human settlement of the region has been attributed to peoples of the Adena culture of mound builders that occupied parts of the Ohio River Valley from 1000 to 200 BC. While the area traded hands over the centuries, at the time the first Europeans set foot in the region in the 17th century, it was part of the hunting grounds of the Iroquois. The first European visitors to Taylor County specifically, the county of which Grafton is the seat, are thought to be British Army deserters who fled Fort Pitt in 1761 during the French and Indian War. As for the first settler of the area that became Grafton, I've been led to information that states that the area was once known as Buffalo Flats, and that William Robinson was the first settler, having preempted the site in 1773. For those of you who, like me until recently, don't know the meaning of preempt in this context, it means to occupy the land to establish the right to purchase it. While William Robinson appears to have been the first settler of the land, it seems that the first legal owner of much of the land on which Grafton sits was the Scots-Irish immigrant Currant family. James Currant, the patriarch of the family, is said to have traded a horse for 1,300 acres of land, including the ground that Grafton sits upon today. The Currants settled the area in time to be counted for the 1782 census at the latest, although I will say that Grafton's government site claims that James Currant, who served in the Revolutionary War, hired 19-year-old George Washington to survey his 1,300 acres. George Washington was the surveyor for the not-too-distant Culpeper County from 1749 to 1750, and there are a lot of records of his time spent early in 1751 surveying the Shenandoah Valley. He was 19 from February of 1751 to February of 1752, so if he did survey the area around Grafton, it would place the Currant family's purchase of the area to that time or before, prior to the French and Indian War of 1754 to 1763. I will also say that the one trip that Washington took out of the country in his life was in the fall of 1751 when he traveled to Barbados with his half-brother Lawrence, hoping that the climate would be better for Lawrence's tuberculosis. George Washington contracted smallpox on that trip, and while I don't have an exact date of his return, I know that Lawrence returned to Mount Vernon in July of 1752, and that Washington quit his career as a surveyor in the fall of that year. I think the claim that George Washington surveyed the site is possible in the summer of 1751, but I can't find any record of it. We now move past the colonial period to 1835, when John Blue, the man in charge of constructing Virginia's northwestern turnpike to the Tigard Valley from the community of Aurora over the mountain ridge to the east, purchased a portion of land from the Currant family for $300. That area would become the nearby town of Fetterman. In West Virginia, the turnpike would be paved in various stages over the next century, eventually becoming US 50, which, as previously mentioned, is one of the major highways running through Grafton today. In 1844, Grafton's county, Taylor County, was incorporated by the Virginia General Assembly from parts of Barber, Harrison, and Marion counties. I've seen the claim that there is a dispute to which Virginian the county is named for, John Taylor or Zachary Taylor. John Taylor, born December 19, 1753 in Caroline County, Colony of Virginia, was a lawyer, a member of the Virginia House of Delegates, a colonel in the Continental Army's cavalry, and eventually a United States Senator for the state of Virginia 3 times before he died aged 70 on August 21, 1824. Zachary Taylor was born November 24, 1784 in Barbersville, Virginia, before his family moved west to land near Louisville, Kentucky. He joined the Army in 1808 and made a name for himself in 40 years of service, rising to the rank of Major General before he was elected President in 1848 and died in office July 9, 1850. I think it's far more likely that the county is named for John Tyler in honor of his decades of work for Virginia specifically, especially as the county was formed in 1844, 4 years before the election that made Zachary Taylor president. Back to Grafton though. While the turnpike drove development of the region, it wasn't until the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad Company built the first Trans-Appalachian Railroad through the area that Grafton really took off. In 1847, the Virginia General Assembly authorized the B&O Railroad to run a line to Wheeling on the Ohio River. A provision of this authorization was that the rail line cross the Tigard River at or within 3 miles of Three Fork Creek, which, you might remember from before, is the location of Grafton. On July 11, 1852, the rail line was completed and the first train ran through the area 2 days later. As rail traffic increased over the next few years, so too did the construction of rail facilities, support services, and housing in the area. According to the city of Grafton, it was on March 15, 1856, just over 4 years after the line was completed, that Grafton was chartered by the Virginia General Assembly, named for John Grafton, a civil engineer who laid out the route of the B&O Railroad. At the outbreak of the Civil War, both sides recognized the strategic importance of Grafton as a rail center. The B&O Railroad connected the Ohio Valley to the eastern seaboard, allowing for quick movement of men and war material. General Robert E. Lee vowed to hold the railroad and sent forces to attempt to recruit in Grafton, but most of the residents were supporters of the Union and formed the Union-supporting Grafton Guards. The Confederate and Union sympathizing forces skirmished on May 22, 1861 in Fetterman, resulting in the death of 32-year-old Thornsbury Bailey Brown, potentially the first Union soldier killed in direct combat, although that claim has been disputed. The next day, the Virginia Secession Convention ratified the state's secession from the Union. There had been 2 votes preceding this, and Taylor County's representative, Chapman Johnson Stewart, had voted against secession both times. Grafton changed hands as the Grafton Guards retreated to Wheeling, and then changed back as the Confederate forces retreated to Philippi, where on June 3, 1861, 800 Confederates were overwhelmed by 3,000 Union soldiers. On June 19, 1861, a new government of the state of Virginia in opposition to secession was formed in Wheeling, regarding the Confederate state government as illegitimate. This would eventually lead to the formation of West Virginia 2 years later on June 20, 1863. For the rest of the war, Grafton was held by the Union. It would be raided by the Confederates multiple times. During this time, Grafton was host to a military hospital that grew from a couple small houses and tents to a massive facility with hundreds of beds to serve the wounded. In 1868, the Grafton National Cemetery was opened, eventually holding 2,100 graves, including those of 1,252 Union soldiers. The city of Grafton has been practicing a tradition they call Flower Strewing Day since 1867, a tradition they claim to be the origin of Memorial Day, although I have found several other locations staking the claim to that holiday as well. In 1878, Grafton became the seat of Taylor County, formerly a designation given to nearby Puntrytown. The city saw a boom in development from 1890 to 1930, during which most of the town was built. On May 10, 1908, Anna Jarvis established the first Mother's Day and a service celebrated in Andrews Methodist Episcopal Church in Grafton. Mother's Day became a state holiday in 1910, and on May 10, 1913, it became a national holiday. From 1934 to 1938, 2 miles south of Grafton, the Tigard Dam was constructed by the Works Progress Administration, leading to the creation of Tigard Lake and the surrounding recreational area. Grafton continued to grow until the 1950s when industrial plants began to close. In 1958, a parade was organized by the women of Grafton to draw jobs to the area, leading to the opening of a baby toy manufacturing plant. The area around Grafton suffered poor air quality due to the railroad until the 1980s, when a restructuring of the rail network led to the relocation of railroad jobs to Florida. In 1982, Grafton National Cemetery was added to the National Register of Historic Places, and the downtown was added to the register in 1984. The loss of jobs over time has led to Grafton's population falling from a peak of 8,517 in 1920 to an estimated 4,651 in 2021. That's about all I could find on real-world Grafton, but I've got a few notes before closing things out here. First, let me start by saying this is a remake of my 6th lore video, first released back in October of 2019. Just like my videos on Darius Angler, the Sunday Brothers, and Morgantown, I felt that the video deserved a remake. The most basic change here is in structure, as I used to tell the story completely chronologically, as in real-world history before Fallout history, and I found that people prefer it the other way around. I've also increased how much I discuss the comparisons between the real world and in-game versions of Grafton. I've also learned a lot more about the story of Fallout 76 in the past 3.5 years, which has added context to my understanding of Grafton. I hope that you can see the value here that I believe has been added. I had pretty much settled on my current style of lore video by my videos on Lewisburg and Berkeley Springs, but those before that point are likely due for a remake before too long. That said, let's get into more notes about this content in particular. Second, after the first release of this video, I received a comment from a member of the Robinson family of Grafton, who was upset that I didn't mention their ancestors' role in the settlement of the area. I didn't generally seek out historical markers when I was making lore videos back then, so I missed the marker at the junction of 119 and 50 regarding the settlement of William Robinson in 1773. I'm sorry I missed this the first time around. Third, I alluded to the fact that the map is jumbled early in the video, but I think I need to expound on that. While previous Fallout games have generally reduced the size of cities and the distances between them, Appalachia's layout is far different when compared to the real-world version. Grafton and Clarksburg are locationally flipped in-game. The river flowing through town in-game flows in the opposite direction of reality. Tiger Dam is above Grafton in real life. In the real-world history section, I spoke about how important the arrival of the B&O Railroad was to the development of Grafton. Despite this, and the fact that Grafton straddles several east-to-west cross-mountain railroads, in-game, Grafton sits at the terminus of a single south-to-north rail line. Eastern Regional Penitentiary, found just southeast of Grafton in-game, is the representation of the real-world West Virginia Penitentiary found in Moundsville, far to the northwest. Fourth, I'm still considering the exact cause of the glowing water in the Toxic Valley. While I maintain that it's a product of the crashed space station, I have to wonder how it has affected all the water in the valley. I was thinking the other day that it's the potential case that it's rainfall runoff contaminated by the white powder, a powder that's potentially iron-based, which could lead to rust-colored water, but then I'd have to wonder why the landscape's still white and not rust-colored. Beyond this, why would the rusty water glow at night? Like I said, I still think it's something from the space station, I just don't know how it has spread to the entire Toxic Valley. Fifth, I think Flavia Stabo made a mistake with her dead man switch failsafe. She set it for 28 years when I think she meant to set it for 28 days. I think that the problem arises from the formatting of the date on the switch, which has years first rather than days. This mistake led her evidence of a government conspiracy not being released to the public until 2103. I also have to think that if not for the nuclear war, her absence would have led to missed payments and the loss of the lease on the P.O. box in Clarksburg, meaning her packages would have just been found and mailed despite her mistake. Sixth, there are some interesting ballots that can be found at the polling places covering a presidential election. Whether these are tied to White Spring Enclave leader Thomas Eckhart's election to the presidency, or an as-of-yet unimplemented event, I don't know, but I thought it was something to note. Seventh, the mascot of Grafton High School in-game is the Grafton Monster. The real-world Grafton High School is home of the Bearcats. I'd seen Bearcats referenced here and there throughout my life and decided to look them up and see if they're a real thing, and they are. They're a strange-looking, tree-dwelling creature from Southeast Asia that really does look like something of a cross between a bear and a cat. Their exact name is Binturong, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, which I'm probably not, and they're considered vulnerable to extinction according to the International Union for Conservation of Nature. Eighth, there's a baby carriage on the roof of the Grafton train station with a pink teddy bear in it. I don't know if this is a reference or something, I just thought it was odd. Ninth, I covered a lot of topics in passing that I've covered more deeply in other videos, Specifically videos covering Eastern Regional Penitentiary, Grafton Steel, the Free States, the Responders, the Brotherhood of Steel, the Enclave, and Harper's Ferry are all available on my channel if you're interested. Lastly, I just want to say, as I have when covering other communities in West Virginia, that I think Grafton is due for a resurgence. While I've never been to West Virginia in person, I've been touring these communities through Google Street View for the past 4 years. It's been saddening to see the beautiful late 19th to early 20th century structures built in the heyday of West Virginia crumbling away due to the lack of capital to repair them. Of course, the loss of these historic buildings has occurred alongside and been dwarfed in importance by the desolation brought by the opiate epidemic. While Grafton has regrettably shrunk since I last covered it 3 years ago, I remain hopeful that it and these other communities will be renewed with the spread of high-speed internet access and work from home. Alright, I think that'll do it for the story of Grafton. If you want to receive notifications when I launch lore videos, you can follow me on Twitter at GamingWithMaps. I'm streaming on YouTube once a week. I don't have a specific time nailed down, but I'll announce when I'm going to stream a day ahead on Twitter. If you're interested, come by and check it out. If you appreciate what I do here and you want to support the channel financially, you can become a patron with Patreon. I want to thank my patrons Mesothelioma, 76 at Texas, Dark Malcontent, Brian, Real76, Dr. Orion, Samsung Smart Fridge, Night Spearhead, and Ahotep for their support. This has been the Irresolute Cartographer. Thanks for watching. I'll see you again next time.